The Ravens look to extend their win streak to 5 straight while the Bucs are out to prove who they really are. That's coming up next on a crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Bucs and Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Baltimore Ravens and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We want to thank you for making Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bucs your first listener view every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho, the host of Locked On Bucs at @JYarcho_Bucs. He is Kevin Ostreicher, host of Locked On Ravens at KOstreicher34. We are here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, we want to share our appreciation for your continued support of these shows. This crossover Thursday episode is presented by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, to win $50 instantly when you play $5. The Bucs are looking to build off their huge win in New Orleans. They have quite the test ahead of them. That is coming up a little bit later. But let's start with the Baltimore Ravens, Kevin, because the Ravens might just be the hottest team in the NFL right now. They're coming into Tampa on a 4-game win streak. Not going to lie, living close to Cincinnati. I laughed really, really hard over that overtime win over the Bengals, but they have the top rushing attack in the NFL. Zay Flowers looks like he's really starting to find his groove, and that's helpful for the Ravens, not so much those of us that have Mark Andrews in fantasy football. But what's the biggest story surrounding the offense with the Baltimore Ravens coming into week 7?
Yeah, there are certainly multiple, James, but I think if I had to pick one, it's the duo of Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry and how well those two have been able to work together. Obviously, both those guys in MVP conversations. There is a world where, we continue on and Lamar wins his 3rd MVP and Derrick Henry wins Offensive Player of the Year. They've been that good this season. Derrick Henry, that, you're on FanDuel, anytime touchdown, like that is just a lock every single week, it seems like. Lamar, and actually one of the things, they played the Commanders last week. They won 30-23, and former Commanders tight end Logan Paulson ended up talking about Lamar. Obviously, we know about his athletic ability, his ability with his arm and with his legs, but something that he said was, Lamar's getting to the line and he's checking out of these certain plays and looking at these looks and going through his progressions. And, Logan Paulson said, I didn't think he had that kind of ability at the line of scrimmage, and those plays are back-breaking. And this is something that Lamar's been doing for years. But the difference is that in Greg Roman's offense, he didn't necessarily have that control. Todd Monken has come in. This is the 2nd season. Obviously, Tampa fans are very familiar with Todd Monken. And he has opened up this offense for Lamar, given him that control. So something Lamar's been doing for years. He's been getting that control back over these last 2. And he's been able to go through progressions, audible at the line, checking from runs to pass. Look, he's a very smart person, very smart football player, and he's using that to his ability, and he has been his entire career with that added freedom in this offense and kind of a tandem, I guess, instead of just Greg Roman running the show. It has opened up everything for this unit. Zay Flowers is playing great. Rashad Bateman is playing great. But the big thing, James, is that in years past, and you talked about Mark Andrews, it's just chuck that thing up. Mark Andrews is down there somewhere. Let's just see what happens. Lamar's spreading the ball around consistently this season, and he's using every weapon in that arsenal that the Ravens have given him, and is part of the many reasons why he is so dominant this season. Number 1 in total yards, top 5, top 7 in so many passing categories, not to mention his rushing ability. He has been incredible this season. And right now, I'd say, him and Baker are some of the top guys in that MVP conversation right now. So maybe a little battle, but in the battle between the Ravens and Bucs this week.
Yeah, I saw NFL on Fox's Carmen Vitale shared something for her podcast that she was doing, and they did one of those side-by-side player A versus player B comparisons. And player A, she goes, you're not going to sneak Baker Mayfield past me. And then player B was Lamar Jackson, and it was pretty impressive how similar they were in terms of completion percentage. I think Baker was up by like 2.5%. Total yards, Lamar had him by like 300. Touchdowns, Baker was up by a couple. Interceptions, Lamar had a fewer. So we're in for a really entertaining game, no doubt about it. And you mentioned Derrick Henry also being in that MVP conversation. I wish I could agree with you because he should be, but we all know that the MVP has turned into whoever is the quarterback of the best team essentially gets the award. It's like the NFL's Heisman. So Derrick Henry, I think, locked and loaded offensive player of the year, should be an MVP candidate, but we all know that it's the quarterback award. But he's running like he's 23 years old again. It's really, really impressive. The level that he's taken that Baltimore offense to, that was already a good offense to begin with, but now things have really opened up for them. But let's flip it over and talk about how the run defense in Baltimore has been one of the best in the league. The passing defense struggling a little bit early in the season. Kevin, what's the top story for that defense coming into Tampa here on Monday Night Football?
It definitely is the secondary and the pass defense. I mean, the run defense you mentioned, it's been great, number one in so many different categories. And Baltimore's domination on the ground, I mean, they're out rushing teams by a wide margin, and that's because their run offense is so good and their run defense doesn't really allow anything either. But in the secondary, there's concern. And it's weird because they have talent back there. Like Marlon Humphrey is having a pretty strong season this year. You have guys like Kyle Hamilton, who's that Swiss Army knife in that defense. Brandon Stevens, while, you're looking at him and some of the stats might not be there, other stats say he's having a great year and he's in a contract year. He could be getting big money from a team this offseason. But Marcus Williams, their big money acquisition a couple of years ago, has fallen off a cliff this year. I believe he's the worst graded safety in the league this year. He's getting frozen, turned around. Guys are coming into his zone with no punishment. It's been a pretty steep fall. And part of this also has to do with play calling and adjustment to a first-time defensive coordinator. Zach Orr has called 6 games. This will be his 7th against Tampa on Monday night. And while he played for 3 years with the Ravens, there was always going to be this learning curve, especially when the Ravens have gone through the gauntlet that they have. First test ever as a coordinator was Patrick Mahomes in week 1, and Andy Reid and that historic offense that they've had for years. And even though that offense hasn't really been the Kansas City offense this year, Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid know how to punish them and experienced coordinators. We've seen that. Then you have guys like Dak Prescott, Joe Burrow. You have Jaden Daniels, who's playing incredible football. They're just going quarterback after quarterback after quarterback. And obviously it does not get any easier with Baker Mayfield in this passing offense Tampa has in week 7. But the other big thing is that, and I've talked about it really all year, James, on Locked On Ravens, is the fact that if there is a number 1 star receiver, you have to stop that guy. Let somebody else beat you. And they didn't really do it with Terry McLaurin last week. I mean, yardage-wise, yes, but he had 2 big touchdowns in that game. Jamar Chase went for almost 200 on this Ravens defense in week 5. They were able to stifle CeeDee Lamb. I thought that was actually their one good performance against a star wide receiver, but they're letting guys who can beat them. Devontae Adams almost single-handedly beat them, besides the Ravens beating themselves in that game in week 2. So now you have 2 studs. You have Mike Evans and you have Chris Godwin, and those are guys you have to account for. And it's a little difficult, or a little more difficult, when it's not just one guy. It's not like you can just throw the farm at Mike Evans. Well, Chris Godwin's going to beat up on you if you do that, and vice versa if you throw it all at Chris Godwin. So the big storyline in Baltimore is the pass defense can't continue doing what they're doing because the passing offense is so good. The rushing offense is so good. The rushing defense is so good. It's just kind of like that final infinity stone of like, all right, can that pass defense get it going? If so, man, this is going to be a very tough team to beat for anybody.
Well, and it's honestly kind of scary to think about. Bucs fans know all too well, you have a first-time play caller at the coordinator spot. That's what they had in Dave Canales last year. And things got a little rocky there for a little bit. They started off hot, lost a ton of games in a row, were able to battle back and make the playoffs. But late in that season, Dave Canales kind of found that rhythm and found that groove. So if Baltimore has the same luck on the defensive side of the ball to really have a defense that plays as well as their offense, that is terrifying for any team in the AFC that might have to run into them in the postseason. But you're 100% right. This isn't just, it's not an offense with just one guy. Chris Godwin is, basically the league's top receiver in most categories. And then he and Evans are tied for the most touchdown receptions in the NFL through the first 6 weeks. So it's going to be a pretty big test. We are going to talk about the Buccaneers side of it as they look to get a win in front of their fans on what is sure to be an emotional night. That is coming up next on this Crossover Thursday episodes of Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. For most of us that like collecting cards, the idea of spending $2,000 or more on a Luka Doncic or Patrick Mahomes rookie card just isn't in the cards. I love collecting, but that's some serious money to drop. Thanks to slab packs from arenaclub.com, now it's possible to score gem mints for a fraction of their retail price. Every card that I listed was hit from a couple of weeks ago's Arena Club slab pack drop. Arena Club is the only repack that provides real value, a complete view of all possible cards, and clear hit rates for each one. Arena Club slab packs are revolutionizing the repack game with transparency. After your pulls are revealed, they'll immediately be placed in your showroom for safekeeping, selling, trading, or auction. The Arena Club grading process is accurate, fast, and transparent with a full grade rationale provided and explanation of how your card was scored. Right now, you can get 10% off your first slab pack or card purchase by going to arenaclub.com/lockedonnfl. Use code LOCKEDONNFL. That's arenaclub.com/lockedonnfl. Code LOCKEDONNFL for 10% off your first purchase. You all know how much I love going to live events, concerts, sporting events. I'm constantly talking on this show about a concert or a game I'm getting ready to go see. And the first place I'm checking out when I look for tickets is Game Time. I actually just got tickets to take my dad for a surprise early birthday gift to see the University of Illinois take on the University of Minnesota in just a couple of weeks in Champaign, Illinois, and I am stoked. I used Game Time's new feature called Game Time Picks. It makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. And I just click on that all-in toggle pricing. No surprises when I get to checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs, Locked On Ravens your first listen review every single day. The new Locked On NFL is here. Locked On NFL is now 2 shows every day. Join the madman Tyler Rowland, who kicks off your morning with a double shot of NFL espresso, and then swing by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. It's the Locked On NFL, and it's twice a day. Check it out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Kevin, let's go ahead and flip things around to the home team, talking about a game that will be played in front of these fans for the first time since Hurricane Milton. That's going to be an emotional night for the Buccaneers as well as their fans. But when you take a look at what's been going on with the offense, you talked about Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, but they finally had an explosion in the run game. Can they keep it going against this defense? You know, as of this recording, we have no word on whether or not Rachaad White is going to be available for this game. My guess, way too early prediction, he's going to play. And that makes the Bucs running back situation a little bit murky. Sean Tucker coming off a 136-yard performance on the ground, nearly 200 total yards and 2 touchdowns. Bucky Irving has been running the ball much more effectively. Rachaad has struggled, but he struggled early last season before he got into a rhythm and started being really, really effective, nearly 1,000 yards on the season. So the question is, can they keep this run game going? And how are they going to utilize this 3-headed monster? And if the Bucs are going to win this one, they have to run the ball. They have to control the clock, keep Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson on the sideline. To me, you got to utilize Rachaad and Bucky early in the game and then start using Sean Tucker in those short yardage, goal line, and then late in games. You know, defenses are going to get tired. Rachaad and Bucky don't have the power and the strength that Sean Tucker does. So you start bruising some of those defenders with Tucker, then you can bring Rachaad or Bucky back in, hit him with some elusiveness, hit him with some quickness, and maybe do better than most teams do against the Ravens run D.
I'm glad you said what you said earlier, James, in that, because I think, to me, one of the best ways to stop this Ravens offense, you said it, is to put the offense out there yourself and run plays for 9-10 minutes and whatever it is, control the clock, because we know that this Ravens offense is so efficient. But for the Ravens defense in particular, I mean, again, top rush defense in the league, giving up just 3 yards per carry. And part of that is because of the guys they have up front. Their front four has played phenomenal this season, especially when stopping the run. Travis Jones, a third-year player out of UConn who fell to the Ravens in the 3rd round a couple of years ago, has been just an absolute menace, pushing over offensive linemen, using his strength. And he has been, in my opinion, Baltimore's best run defender this year. Then you also have guys like Nnamdi Madubuike, who you have to worry about. Michael Pierce, who is a force to be reckoned with in there. And their pass rush is also something, or at least their outside linebackers, they can both rush the passer and also set an edge for you. Odafe Owe is a physical outside linebacker. And so you have this, whether you want to call it a 3-headed monster out there in Tampa right now, or just a confusing situation. Either way, you got a lot of talented running backs. And so for the Ravens, any week, it's about making the opposing offense one-dimensional. And so if Tampa Bay is able to set themselves up in second and short, because second and long they're just drive killers. You know, if you get stuffed for no gain or 1 yard on first down, you put yourself in a 2nd and 10, 2nd and 9, that just changes up how you have to play that to the sticks. And then if you get stopped in an incompletion on 2nd down, then you're all of a sudden in 3rd and 10, 3rd and 9, and that just, it ruins everything. So one of the keys for Tampa, and we'll get to this in a little bit, is to be able to establish yourself early against this Ravens run defense, because again, that's where the Ravens bread and butter has been. And so if the Ravens secondary continues to struggle and you can take advantage of their strength, if Tampa does that, that could make it a very difficult game defensively for the Ravens.
Yeah. And although the Bucs have had, pretty decent success on those 2nd and longs, 3rd and longs, thanks to Chris Godwin, you keep putting yourself in those positions and it will bite you in the butt. We've seen that happen as well. So while they're doing well, that's not a situation that you want to put yourself in against those pass rushers, against this Baltimore defense. Then when it doesn't work, you got to punt the ball away. And now all of a sudden you're digging yourself a hole that's going to be really, really hard to climb out of. Defensively for the Buccaneers, the biggest question is which defense is going to show up. In the past, they've had a lot of success against Derrick Henry, but that was when he had Ryan Tannehill and Will Levis at quarterback. That's not the case anymore. The Bucs have to actually worry about who is under center this time when they face them. And they're uncharacteristically outside the top 10 in run defense this year. Now, they do finally have Kalijah Kancey and Antoine Winfield Jr. back, but, is this going to be the defense that allowed over 500 passing yards to Kirk Cousins and Kyle Pitts to have his best game in years? Or is it going to be the defense that shut out the Saints second half with 3 sacks and 2 interceptions? Containing Lamar first and foremost is pivotal, but the primary focus has to be keeping Derrick Henry from taking over this football game. The defense didn't let Alvin Kamara go anywhere in the second half. They shut down Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler with the Commanders. They shut down Saquon Barkley, who at that time was, the top running back in the NFL. But they also let Jahmyr Gibbs, get things going on the ground game. Jaden Daniels, even Bo Nix to a certain extent, those guys really started to run over him. So Todd Bowles has to have his game plan ready, and not the kind of game plan he had against Atlanta where the entire team couldn't stop a nosebleed. More like that game plan the second half against the New Orleans Saints, when they made some adjustments, they figured out some of the things that Rattler was trying to do or was already doing and completely shut it down.
And one of the things that makes this Baltimore offense so dangerous is that duo and the ability to work play action off of that. We saw for the Ravens last week against the Commanders, Washington sold out everything to try to stop that run game. And while they admittedly had a little bit more success, and by that, Derrick Henry still won for 132 yards. But regardless, what happened was the Ravens said, that's fine if you're going to sell out and put these guys in the box. Our receivers are going one-on-one with your secondary. And that's money for the Ravens in that situation, because Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, those are guys who can win that. So Tampa's secondary, if Tampa decides to sell out, put guys in the box, try to neutralize that Ravens rushing attack, their corners are going to have to hold up in one-on-one coverage and make sure that guys like Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, etc., do not beat them. And plus, we have the threat of the Mark Andrews, who, again, even if he hasn't been producing the way that a lot of people have been accustomed to over the course of his career, his presence is still the word that we use here in Baltimore. Is a lot of these players have gravity. Like, you have to move with Lamar Jackson. You have to move with Derrick Henry. If you leave Mark one-on-one, even though it's not been a strong start, he still is probably going to be able to make your defense pay. So there's so many ways that this goes. Tampa's secondary is going to have to be key in that, as well as effectively stopping Lamar and Derrick Henry. And kind of like what we talked about for the Tampa side of things, if you want to win, you got to force the Ravens into 2nd and 9s, into 3rd and 8s, and make them do that. And even so, Lamar's been slinging the ball so well, much like Baker has, that it sometimes won't even matter in those situations. But priority number one has to be stopping the Ravens' ground game if you are the Buccaneers, for sure.
All right. 3 things that each team needs to do in order to get a primetime win on Monday night. That is coming up next on Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bucs. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. The Buccaneers are 3.5-point home underdogs to the Baltimore Ravens this Monday night with an over-under of 48.5. So start all of your fantasy players in this one. But if you want to get in on the action on Thursday night, the Broncos are 2.5-point road favorites as Sean Payton returns to New Orleans to take on the Saints with a less impressive over-under of 36.5. You're going to get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet at FanDuel.com. That's $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet at FanDuel.com. Wrapping things up here on a crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bucs. And this crossover Thursday is presented by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Kevin, we have talked a lot about what the Bucs have to offer, what the Ravens have to offer, some of the shortcomings. What are the 3 things that Baltimore needs to do on Monday night in order to come away with their 5th straight win and really start to put a stranglehold on the AFC as a whole?
Yeah, it's been quite the turnaround for Baltimore since that 0-2 start. But I think the first thing that the Ravens have to do in this game, I would love it if they were to get off to a fast start against this Tampa team. Like you said, I expect a lot of points in this game both ways. And if the Ravens can get out to a 10-0, 14-3, let's just say something along those lines type of lead, that will let them play defense more freely. Maybe Tampa will have to abandon the run game at that point. We'll see, how that goes for them. But for the Ravens, they have proven that they can, playing with a lead in the 4th quarter gets a little bit dicey for them, at least over the course of this season. But at least for the first 3 quarters, they play with a lead pretty well. And then we've also seen, for example, that game against Cincinnati and even the game against Kansas City where they had to come from behind and were just a toe away from beating or tying Kansas City in that game. They've been able to come back in some of these games, but it does not hurt to have a fast start. And I think you can establish momentum in that game. And sometimes when you do that, a la what happened against Buffalo for Baltimore in week 4, Derrick Henry opens that up with an 87-yard touchdown. Sometimes you just don't look back after you were able to do that. I also think for the Ravens defensively, kind of like what we talked about in the first couple segments, Baltimore has to be able to shut down or at least slow down Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. I don't think you're going to completely shut both guys down. They're going to get something somewhere with those guys. They're too talented not to. But if those guys are beating you over and over again, it opens up everything for Tampa Bay. I think they'll be able to run the football more effectively. Other targets will be able to get more because then you have to start shadowing guys over to those 2 players. So just like we've seen for the Ravens this season, star receivers will get theirs in some way, shape, or form. But can you limit it enough to where it doesn't feel as big of a threat and you feel comfortable maybe with some one-on-one coverages, maybe with just a little shadow here and there? If you have to start doubling guys or moving guys into that zone, Tampa could be able to feast off of that, especially with how Baker is slinging this football around. And then finally, just mistake-free football. One of the things that a lot of people have echoed this year in Baltimore is the Ravens' biggest opponent is themselves. They've beaten themselves in multiple times, almost lost games because of penalties or poor decision-making. John Harbaugh has been under fire a couple of times. And actually, I don't know if you saw, James, Mad Dog went on ESPN yesterday and was said, Tony Romo called him a top 10 coach on the CBS broadcast of all time. And Mad Dog was like, well, Harbaugh must have taken Romo out for dinner. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, all this stuff. He said Jeff Saturday was a better coach and like was just
Jeez.
going off on that. But Harbaugh's been awesome during his time in Baltimore. The issue with him over the last 5 or so years has been some of that decision making and some of the game awareness, where we know Harbaugh's record, but it was a pretty clean game from John Harbaugh in week 6, where first 5 weeks there was always something to talk about. If he can put together another clean game, no poor decisions, and that's all the coaching staff, not just Harbaugh, but coaching staff, players, everybody plays a clean game. I think that gives the Ravens the best shot to win, because you are not just hurting yourself over and over in those situations.
Yeah, and on the Bucs side of things, look, they got to clog up those run lanes. They got to expose the secondary. And for the love of all things holy, protect Baker Mayfield. Look, clogging up the run lanes, Vita Vea, Kalijah Cansey, Logan Hall, Levante David, KJ Britt, those guys have to be on top of things in this one. They have to stop Derrick Henry immediately before he gets to the second level. If Henry gets past that defensive line with a head of steam, those Bucs defensive backs are going to have a really bad night. Henry is going to bounce off of them like a grown man playing football against a peewee team. The Bucs defensive line is very different when they had Vita Vea and Kalijah Cansey together. That became evident down the stretch last week against the New Orleans Saints, but it's a lot easier said than done to stop someone like Henry, but the Bucs absolutely cannot afford to let him dictate this game. As far as exposing the secondary, you talked about it. I've talked about it. It's no secret that the Ravens secondary outside of Marlon Humphrey this season has struggled a little bit, and that's real handy for a Bucs team that has Mike Evans that can get huge chunks in a hurry on the outside. Humphrey is going to have his hands full if he's lining up with Chris Godwin out of the slot, the league's leader in receptions, touchdowns, yards after catch, but he might be the only slot corner on the Buccaneers schedule that can actually slow Godwin down. So the issue there is, if he's going to slow Godwin down, now Jalen McMillan has to step up. Sterling Shepard has to step up. Mike Evans has to be the first ballot Hall of Famer that he is and expose some of those weaknesses in the secondary in order to make sure that this Bucs offense can stay on the field, extend drives that end in scores, really chew up a lot of clock and be able to control things. And then, of course, speaking of Baker Mayfield, you have to keep him upright and so that he can find those guys down the field. There are some really good pass rushers on the Ravens defense, and the Bucs' entire starting offensive line has not been together since week 1 against the Commanders. Rookie center Graham Barton. I almost said Garrett Bowles. Rookie center Graham Barton was out last week with a hamstring issue. Again, we don't know if he's going to be available for this one. Hopefully he is, but Robert Hainsey played really well in his absence. But they have to protect Baker, allow those wide receivers to get through their routes and create those mismatches, allow that stuff to develop so that Baker can keep doing what he's done all year. If Mayfield has to start bailing and taking off to run, the Ravens are going to gain an advantage. It's going to take a lot of punishment. He does a pretty good job of sliding, but you and I both know the competitor that Baker is, and a couple of times he's going to lower that shoulder and he's going to try to fight for those extra yards. Don't even let him do it. Give him the clean pocket to work with. Let him pick apart a sometimes susceptible Ravens secondary. But Kevin, we're in for an exciting one, man. This is going to be a really fun game to watch. I'm glad it's in prime time. I'm glad these two teams are going to be under the big spotlight, especially with the way that Lamar and Baker have been playing this year.
Yeah, I'm pumped. I mean, and Lamar and Baker obviously have a history going back to both being drafted. Baker first overall, Lamar last pick of the first round in 2018. Both the guys have so much respect for each other. There are so many cool stories and everything. And then Baker honestly had a couple of fiery lines that people here in Baltimore still reference from back in the day. But it's cool to see those two every time they step on the field together. And while they're not going to be facing off one-on-one, Baker's not going to be trying to tackle Lamar out there. The quarterback
that would be ugly.
Yeah, I don't know how that would go. I think I'd probably pick the Ravens if that were the case, but going to be a good game regardless.
Yeah, 100%. And just so that your listeners and viewers know, Baker's a little bit different of a guy than he was back in those Browns days. So maybe don't hold it against him too much, things that he said back then, but I digress. That is going to do it for this episode of Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bucs. Please check out everything that Kevin is doing with Locked On Ravens, everything that I'm doing at Locked On Bucs. You can subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast platforms. Follow on Twitter. I'm at Yarcho_Bucs. Kevin is at KOstriker34. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, and thank you so much for joining us here on a Crossover Thursday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.